Good morning. It's Tuesday, December 29, 2015. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, after retaking Ramadi, Iraq pledges the total demise of ISIS in its territory in 2016. We're going to take a look at this year's biggest economic stories. And later on in the show, the new hacking scandal that's rocking Hollywood. Good morning, I'm Meredith Ross, and we begin today in Iraq, where after months of preparation and days of intense fighting, Iraqi military forces waved the national flag over the central government complex in the city of Ramadi, announcing they had succeeded in recapturing the city lost to ISIS fighters back in May. This is the first major triumph for Iraq's U.S.-backed army since it collapsed in the face of an assault by the hardline Sunni militants in 2014. The troops' progress had been slowed by explosives planted in streets and booby-trapped buildings, and security officials say they still need to clear some pockets of insurgents in the city and in its outskirts. Now, Iraqi authorities said that once it was fully secured, the running of the city would be handed over to local police and Sunni tribal leaders. The government now sets its sights on the northern city of Mosul, the largest population center controlled by Islamic State in either Iraq or Syria. And Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said 2016 would see the total demise of the jihadist group in his country. And let's watch a report from the latest from Iraq, and we'll take it from there.
Rare scenes of celebration in Iraq. Television cameras focused on the Iraqi flag Monday as it was again flown from atop a government building in the devastated city of Ramadi, more than 7 months after the capital of Anbar province was overrun by Islamic State terrorists.
Yes, the city of Ramadi has been liberated. Iraqi counterterrorism forces have raised the Iraqi flag over the government complex in Anbar to raise the name of the country and write down a new date, because we have defended our dignity and our lands.
A dramatic and important statement, but a premature one nonetheless. While Ramadi's central government compound was indeed taken by the military Monday morning, the commander of Iraq's regional operations later clarified that IS maintains a presence in about 30% of the city, with fighting ongoing in at least one central neighborhood, as well as several surrounding villages.
We will liberate all our captured cities, God willing, just as we have liberated Jurf al-Nasr, Amerli, Diluya, Tikrit, and Baiji.
An eventual complete liberation of Ramadi would be the most significant victory for the Iraqi army so far in its fight against IS. The current operation began in early November, and some, including high-ranking American officials, had expressed frustration at the slow progress. One reason for this was Baghdad's unwillingness to use powerful Shiite militias at its disposal so as to avoid sectarian violence in predominantly Sunni Anbar. Sunni tribal fighters are playing a major role in the current operation, a factor which is seen as key to driving the Islamic State out of Iraq.
And joining us in studio this morning, our I-24 News senior Middle East analyst, Ali Walken. Good morning, Ali. And Daniel Nisman, president of the Levantine Group Consultancy. Thank you for being here. So, Daniel, what does this mean for the fight against IS in Iraq?
Well, first of all, it's definitely a sort of it's a victory for the whole U.S. effort, which back in May sort of collapsed when the Iraqi military, which is bolstered by the United States, retreated and IS captured Ramadi. But now you have a situation where U.S. training, intensified U.S. airstrikes, U.S. weapons shipments, bolstering mainly the Iraqi army, Sunni tribal elements, have been able to successfully retake a city that was considered vital to the Islamic State, and that the Islamic State fought very hard to retain. So this is basically sort of recognition of the effectiveness of the U.S. effort. And you have to remember that in Iraq you have several competing international foreign influences. So, for example, this can also be considered a triumph over Iranian influence, whereas that Iranian-led alliance was mainly responsible for retaking Tikrit. And as we look at recapturing additional cities in the future, mainly Mosul and other areas, that competition can probably be expected to intensify.
And we'll get to Mosul in just a moment. But Ali, what's the strategic importance of Ramadi geographically
I think Ramadi is mostly a symbolic issue, but Meredith, I do agree with Danny because the key, in my opinion, in this battle around Ramadi was the collaboration of the Sunnite tribes. The Sunnite tribes that until very recently hosted, supported, and backed the Islamic State, and the recruits of the Islamic State in Iraq came from these Sunnite tribes. And the fact that the Americans convinced the Iraqi government, unlike Tikrit, not to marginalize the role that is played by Shiite militias or Iranian-backed militias. It is true that here and there in the footages that we saw from the liberated parts of Ramadi, we saw some vehicles on which there were the slogans, the Shiite traditional slogans of Ali and Hussein, but their role, and we did not hear about atrocities committed in Ramadi like we heard in Tikrit and elsewhere. And the spokesperson of the Iraqi government said that we are going to give the keys to of the city to the local police and to the tribal Sunnite leaders. And the question is whether the Iraqi government will indeed give the power of the city to the Sunnite elements, or will try to impose its agenda over these tribes, because the question is whether this is a new strategy of the Iraqi government, or only a local policy that we met in Ramadi, because this will have an impact over other areas controlled by the Islamic State in Iraq.
Certainly. And looking now to the international scope, you mentioned the Americans helping, but in this specific operation to retake Ramadi, what external influences were involved there?
Well, first of all, there was intensive U.S. and also British and other airstrikes by other coalition members working with locals on the ground. There has been Iraqi claims that U.S. Special Forces have also been involved, but there was also a training effort going on at the Habaniya Air Base, which is between Fallujah and Iraq, between Fallujah and Ramadi, rather, where you had hundreds of Sunni tribesmen coming to be trained by the U.S. and then being moved into combat.
And what about Shiite militias? They were kept out of fighting?
There have been various reports that they've been that the Shiite militias have been on the outskirts of the fighting, and they're also, of course, operating in the Fallujah area. And that's actually going to be one place to watch after Ramadi. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Mosul, but there's also a lot of places in between. We have to remember that ISIS still controls a good amount of Fallujah, and a few days ago, the Shiite militia-led offensive had resumed in Fallujah to retake that city, and there's already been some concerns that there may be atrocities there as well.
Mm-hmm. It is really concerning. But looking at Ramadi, I mean, actually moving now to Mosul, Iraqi forces are looking now towards the city, but it's a totally different setting. It's really a big stronghold for Islamic State. What challenges do they face now?
The challenges are, of course, first of all, the support that the Islamic State is still receiving from the local population. The geography of Mosul, the very famous Dam of Mosul, is a key element that the Islamic State is going to use in its fight against the Iraqi forces and the international community. And I think that the Mosul fight will be determined by the development of other territories controlled by the Islamic State, and the way that the Iraqi forces will try to liberate these zones. If we are going to see the same behavior of the Shiite militias like we saw in Fallujah and Tikrit and elsewhere, I think the mission will be much more complicated. But Meredith, we should not forget we are talking about Mosul. It is true there are still areas controlled by the Islamic State before Mosul. In Mosul, there are many international actors that have some impact, the Turkish forces, the Kurds, etc. So the equation regarding Mosul is much more complicated. This is why the Iraqi spokesperson were very careful in saying we are going to liberate the whole territory by the end of 2016, and they did not mention any specific deadline to liberate other other areas. For the Sunnite community, Ramadi can be typecast where to see if it is a positive example of the collaboration between Sunnite elements and between the central government. Are the government going to give the Sunnite local leadership the local autonomy they need in order to rule their cities, or they are going to be only players in a chess table that they have a very modest influence? In the coming days and weeks, we are going to see this, and this is going to determine the continuation of the Iraqi army effort.
And joining the conversation now from Iraq is freelance journalist Mohammed Saleh. Good morning, Mohammed.
Good morning to you too.
So how are people in Iraq reacting to this victory of the retaking of Ramadi? Has it given them a sliver of hope?
Well, this is definitely a very important victory for the Iraqi government forces and for the country in the fight against ISIS. It definitely does give people some measure of hope that the government forces are back to their capacity to be able to launch such major operations. And as your guest said, all eyes will be now on Mosul and how the Iraqi government forces, in combination with the local Sunni forces and the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, will be able to act to take the city back from ISIS.
And my colleague Ali Walken here just mentioned a statement by Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, who said that 2016 will be the year the Islamic State will be destroyed in Iraq. Now, do you think that's a realistic statement?
It is difficult to say that this will be possible to achieve. ISIS and its predecessors have had a presence in Iraq for over a decade, and given that the group also controls such a large portion of the Syrian territory, it is really difficult to assume that ISIS is going to be completely expelled out of Iraq, even if the city of Mosul and other smaller towns that ISIS still controls will be cleared from the terrorist group. It will still maintain some sort of presence, most probably in the border regions between Iraq and Syria, except if those areas on the Syrian side of the border are cleared too.
Mohammed Saleh, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And moving from Iraq now to Syria, where the death toll continues to climb as various militaries carry out massive airstrikes, often for competing goals. Russia alone said it bombed nearly 600 targets across the country in the last 3 days alone, while in the city of Homs, dozens were killed in twin blasts. Now, a small measure of relief was granted to some 300 families who have been trapped in the Idlib province near the Turkish border. Under a UN-brokered local ceasefire, the families were granted passage to Turkey and then Lebanon, while rebel forces were allowed to travel to Beirut and regroup in Turkey. But first, let's watch this report.
Syria continues to be torn between fierce fighting on the one hand and attempts to end the war on the other. Hundreds of fighters and civilians have started evacuating 3 besieged towns, including Zabadani, near the Lebanese border. The ceasefire is a rare agreement between the Syrian army and anti-government rebels, most of them from the Ahrar al-Sham group and other local factions. The deal was backed by the UN and agreed upon months ago, but only at the beginning of this week was it given a green light. Dozens of ambulances and Red Cross vehicles took the evacuees, many of them injured, across the Syrian border. They are expected to return to government-held areas after they receive medical treatment. Meanwhile, 2 bombings killed at least 32 people and wounded 90 others in the western city of Homs. The blasts hit the Zahara district in the city's center. It is the second major attack in Homs since a truce similar to the one implemented in Zabadani took effect in the city's Waher district. Many noted that the evacuations are the first stage in an international plan towards a transition of power in Damascus. However, officials in Homs dismissed this.
There was no interference from countries in the region or internationally. Neither friendly countries nor others had anything to do with this subject. This is a Syrian issue, and the government's way of creating an atmosphere of love, honesty, and reconciliation.
As 2015 comes to an end, it is clear that the war in Syria is one of the biggest challenges the world is facing. The latest developments may be the turning point towards possible reconciliation.
So, Daniel, tell us more about this effort to evacuate these rebel fighters and their families, and the ceasefire. Is there hope for optimism now?
I don't believe so. There's been many tactical ceasefires in places like the Damascus suburbs, in Homs, and now in Zabadani, where basically both sides came to an understanding that they're basically in a deadlock. So what the Zabadani agreement basically did was it took rebels that were being besieged mainly by Hezbollah for the last few months, and it tied it with the plight of two Shiite towns in Idlib province that, as a response to the Zabadani siege, were being shelled for months by Sunni rebels. Basically, what you have here is almost a sort of population transfer, where you've got Shias being moved from majority Sunni areas to friendly areas elsewhere, and you have Sunni rebels being relocated towards northern Syria, and it can be said that this is more of a walk down the wrong direction in terms of population transfers along sectarian lines. You could also say that it's even a part of the basically future of Syria, where you have these cantons according to ethnic and religious population characteristics. But overall, I mean, it does. I don't believe that this has an overall effect on the fighting. A lot of the fighting is determined by international actors, which you have a completely different process ongoing from the Vienna conference, which will restart next month.
And it'll restart next month. And looking at this, the ceasefire deal, this one where people were able to evacuate. They had to evacuate to Lebanon and then to Turkey, only to fly back to Syria.
Absolutely, and this showed the complexity of the situation. And I totally agree with Daniel, because this is an exchange of population. We cannot define it in a very different way. We are taking a Shiite population to a friendly areas and evacuating Sunnite population to a friendly Sunnite areas. But we cannot ignore one element. Zabadani is, in my opinion, recently the Syrians had established the Ministry of Reconciliation. And the Syrian regime is going into track. Actually, three tracks. The diplomatic tracks, where the Syrian regime have very little impact and influence. The military track, in which the Syrian regime is, of course, backed by the Russian and have some achievements on the ground. And the reconciliation. The reconciliation is taking place in areas where both rebels and regime, but mainly the rebels, understand that it's worth reaching such local agreements, evacuating rebel forces and transferring them elsewhere, in order to prevent the area of being more besieged or having more damages and military efforts. The Syrians are focusing this effort in the region of Damascus suburbs, but not only. We saw it in Homs at the very early this year, and in Zabadani. And I think, from what we hear from Syrian sources, that this is going to be the beginning of a long process of local truces that, at the end of the day, will allow the regime to evacuate what, in its opinion, are the strategic areas in which he is interested, and to concentrate the rebels in areas right now close to Turkey, less close to Jordan, but to try to evacuate most of the regions around Damascus and Latakia from the presence of anti-regime rebels.
They're saying it's only helping the regime in the end. These sort of
At the end of the day, it is helping, in my opinion, both sides, because it is consolidating the presence of rebels in friendly areas, mainly near the borders with Turkey and Jordan. But it is also helping the regime to try to say, we are dominating more than the famous 3% of the Syrian soil.
So we will see how all of this develops. Ali Walken and Daniel Nisman, thank you both very much for being here this morning.